Welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Mhm.
You know, it's funny because, well, not funny, but
Yeah.
it's interesting how often we get asked this question about how much Christians should care about what other people think.
Right.
It's almost like this constant tension between wanting to stay true to like your faith and your values,
hmm
but also, I mean, you don't live in a vacuum,
No, you don't. You're in the world.
right? You're part of a community and,
Yeah, and it's interesting because we actually have a source today that really digs into this whole question.
well, perfect.
It's a piece called "Should Christians Care About What Others Think?" A balanced perspective, and it doesn't really like give us a black and white answer,
Oh,
but it does lay out some really helpful,
considerations.
yeah, considerations and kind of biblical insights to grapple with this.
I love that because I feel like sometimes as Christians we get these kind of extremes,
Yeah.
either like I don't care what anyone thinks, I'm just going to do my own thing,
hmm
or the flip side where you're so worried about what people think that you're kind of almost paralyzed.
You're afraid to act.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So finding that middle ground, that balance.
That's the sweet spot.
Yes. And you know me, I always love to start with a good story. And what better story than Noah's Ark?
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine the peer pressure that dude was under?
Oh my gosh. I mean,
Right.
talk about going against the grain.
Right.
The whole community is like, what are you doing? You're building a giant boat. There's no water.
It wasn't just like a little side eye, right? It was
Yeah.
full blown. You're crazy.
Absolutely. And here's the thing, like we tend to think of this story in terms of just like blind faith or obedience.
hmm
But I think it speaks to something even deeper. This primal human need for belonging,
Yeah.
like to go against the grain of your entire community.
That's scary.
That's terrifying. And yet he persevered.
It makes you wonder, like, how many of us would have the courage to do that, to stand up for what we believe in, even when everyone else thinks we're nuts.
Right. And I think that's where that kind of tension comes in because like, there is this call to radical obedience.
Right.
Sometimes it might mean you're going to be misunderstood, but then on the flip side you have this call to be, an ambassador for Christ,
Yeah.
which means our reputation does matter. And it's not about like vanity or anything like that, but it's about recognizing that how we live reflects on our faith.
It's like we're kind of walking billboards in a way.
Yeah, and remember that whole salt and light thing? Like
Oh, yeah.
those are metaphors, but they have so much meaning, right? Like salt preserves and
As
flavors,
in light.
light illuminates. And so a good reputation can actually enhance that impact. People are more likely to listen to someone they respect.
Someone they see living out their beliefs.
Exactly. But if our actions contradict our words, it's like that salt loses its saltiness.
Or the light's gone dim.
Yeah. And our witness just it loses its power.
Okay, so that makes sense. But help me square this circle then, because if we're supposed to be like ultimately focused on pleasing God,
Uh,
why does it even matter what other people think?
that's the million-dollar question. And I think it comes down to understanding that it's not about seeking people's approval as the end goal.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that how we live can either draw people closer to God or it can actually push them away.
Okay, so it's not about like becoming a people pleaser,
No, it's about being intentional, being consistent.
having that integrity.
And I think it's also about discernment. Like, it's not just what people think, but it's also about who we're listening to.
Okay, and unpack that a little bit for me because that's really interesting.
So, like, if you're getting criticized by someone who just completely doesn't share your values.
Like doesn't get it at all.
Yeah. They don't understand your faith, then it might be a little easier to just kind of let that roll off your back.
Easier said than done sometimes though, right?
It is, but you got to try. Don't give that negativity power. But what if the criticism is coming from someone who you really trust?
Like a mentor or a close friend.
Yeah, someone who knows you, who loves you, and who also shares your faith.
Okay, that's different.
That's different. You got to lean in and listen because they might be seeing something that you're not.
So it's almost like you're filtering the noise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about discernment, figuring out which voices are actually worth listening to.
So how do we get better at that? Like how do we develop that discernment muscle?
I'm glad you asked that because that's a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about next time.
Ooh, cliffhanger. Okay, so folks, tune in next time as we dive even deeper into this whole idea of discernment and how to filter out the noise.
We're going to get practical. So until then, think about this. Who are you listening to? And are those voices helping you grow closer to God, or are they pulling you away?
A lot to think about, huh? See you next time.
See you then.
Mm-mm.
You know, picking up where we left off about like filtering that noise and who you're listening to, well, the source material actually talks about these different like levels.
Levels.
Yeah, levels of like reputation and how the stakes get higher.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What do you mean by levels?
Well, it's like, okay, imagine someone who's, let's say, hoping to, get married someday,
Mm-hmm.
and they really want to marry someone who, shares their faith, right? Well, the source material is saying that in that case, you need to be even more careful about your reputation.
That makes sense because it's almost like you're not just representing yourself anymore.
Right. It's like you're representing, the kind of person you want to attract. It's a walking, talking testimony.
It's like, hey, this is the kind of life I'm building. Are you interested?
Exactly. And then it takes it even a step further. Like imagine someone who aspires to a leadership position in their church or even like in their community.
Oh, okay. So the bar gets raised even higher.
Exactly. Like it uses the example of a bishop even, and it even quotes from the Bible, 1 Timothy 3:2-7.
What does that say?
Well, it lists all these qualities, like being blameless, sober-minded, having a good reputation.
So it's like the more influence you have, the more your actions are going to be under a microscope.
It's like that ripple effect, right?
Ooh, I like it. The bigger the pond, the bigger the ripples.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Sometimes, even when we're trying to do the right thing, like genuinely trying to live out our faith, we're going to face criticism.
Oh, absolutely.
And the source material makes this really important distinction between like criticism that's valid and criticism that's just noise.
Oh, okay. So how do we tell the difference? That seems really hard.
It is, but like, okay, think about it this way. Let's say you're a Christian working in a secular environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might feel pressure to kind of like conform to a culture that doesn't align with your values.
I've been there. It can be so uncomfortable.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And that's where that discernment comes in.
You got to ask yourself, like, is this criticism rooted in like a genuine misunderstanding of my faith? Or is it coming from like a place of prejudice?
Okay. So sometimes you just got to let it go.
Sometimes you just got to shake it off. Don't give it more power than it deserves.
Okay. But then on the flip side, like, what if the criticism, eye salad? What if we've actually messed up?
Yeah, that's where things get a little harder.
Yeah, because that requires some serious humility.
Humility and a willingness to change, to admit we were wrong.
And that's not always easy.
No, it's not. But you know what? In the long run, owning up to our mistakes actually strengthens our credibility.
How so?
It shows that we're not afraid to be vulnerable.
To learn.
To grow.
Yeah.
We're all human.
Right. Oh, for sure. Mistakes are going to happen.
It's how we respond to them that really matters.
Okay, I love that. So we've talked about discernment, humility, community. Any other like practical tips for navigating this whole reputation thing? Yeah, actually, the source material, it actually just comes right out and says it. Christians, take care of your reputation.
Wow. No messing around.
No messing around. And it quotes Ecclesiastes 7:1, which says, a good name is better than fine perfume.
Okay, now I'm picturing people walking around smelling like their reputation.
Haha, yeah. But seriously, it's a good reminder that we shouldn't just be, like, careless with how we're perceived by others.
So it's not about being obsessed with image or anything like that?
No, it's about recognizing that actions have consequences.
Okay, that makes sense. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to pleasing God, right? Not people.
Exactly. That's got to be the compass that guides our decisions, our behavior.
Even if it means making choices that aren't popular.
Even if it ruffles some feathers. But here's the cool thing. When we're truly living in alignment with God's will, our reputation often kind of takes care of itself.
Like a natural byproduct.
Exactly. Not because we're striving for recognition, but because our actions are just, they're flowing from a place of, God's goodness.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of like general principles here, but I'm curious, how does this all play out in like specific situations? Like what about dating or navigating a workplace where, your faith isn't the norm?
Yeah, great questions. And actually, those are some of the scenarios we're going to dive into after the break. But first, I want you to think about this. If pleasing God is our ultimate goal, what does that actually look like in those tricky, everyday situations? Hold on to that thought, and we'll be right back.
Okay, so we're back and ready to get into some of those like real life scenarios where, trying to figure out how much to care about what people think can feel like, I don't know, like walking a tightrope.
It's a balancing act for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right in. Let's say you're a Christian and you're working in a workplace where, most of your colleagues don't share your faith and you're trying to, live out your values, but you're also facing this pressure to, like, conform, maybe even participate in things that make you uncomfortable.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It is. So what do you do?
Well, the source material actually talks about the importance of boundaries.
Okay.
It's about being clear on, what you're willing to compromise on and what's just like a hard no.
Non-negotiable.
Yeah. And it's not about like isolating yourself or being judgmental.
Right.
But it's about like knowing your limits and finding those creative ways to be a positive influence without, compromising your integrity.
So it's like finding those win-win solutions.
Exactly. Like maybe you politely decline to participate in something, but you offer an alternative suggestion.
Well, I like that.
Or maybe it's about finding those subtle ways to, kind of weave your values into conversation.
Like how?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe you share a story about how your faith helped you through a time or something.
And sometimes it's just about living it out.
Absolutely. Like just being that reliable coworker, being supportive.
That speaks volumes.
It does. Actions speak louder than words.
Okay, so switching gears a little bit,
Yeah.
What about dating? Because, that's a whole other minefield, right? Especially as a Christian.
Oh, for sure. The dating scene can be tricky.
Because the world has, like, a very different playbook sometimes.
Very different. And the source material, it really emphasizes the importance of intentionality when it comes to dating as a Christian.
What does that look like?
Well, it's about, remembering the purpose of dating.
To
build a foundation for a potential marriage.
Right.
One that honors God. Your people, friends, mentors, church community, people who can, encourage you.
Keep you accountable.
Yeah. And remind you that you're worth waiting for, that you don't have to settle.
Because you're not. Okay, so we talked about work, we talked about dating. What about when you're getting, like, criticized for being, I don't know, too into your faith?
Too religious?
Yeah, like you're almost being told to, like, tone it down.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people.
It's like they feel like they have to, like, hide their faith or something.
Which is so sad. And, again, I think that's where that discernment comes in. Like,
Yeah.
Is this criticism coming from a place of genuine concern? Maybe you are being a little,
Overzealous.
Yeah, maybe. But what if you're just, like, genuinely excited about your faith?
Just radiating joy.
Yeah. Don't let anyone steal that from you.
So how do you strike that balance?
Well, it's about, sharing your faith with boldness, but also with humility and respect.
You're not shoving it down people's throats.
Right. Exactly. It's about understanding that everyone's on their own journey.
Right.
And we need to meet people where they are.
It's about building bridges, not walls.
Yes. And sometimes, that means having those tough conversations.
But doing it with grace.
Grace and understanding.
And sometimes, it might just mean being a quiet example.
Yeah. Letting your actions speak for themselves.
And trusting that God's going to, work through it all.
Exactly. He's got you.
Okay. So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I think it's so easy to get caught up in, like, what other people think.
Oh, it's so easy, especially in today's world.
But at the end of the day, we got to remember who we're accountable to, right?
To God. He's the ultimate audience.
And when we're focused on pleasing him,
everything else just kind of falls into place.
it's like our lives become this reflection of his love, his grace.
And that's the most powerful testimony of all.
So well said. Okay, listeners, we hope this deep dive has been helpful, encouraging, and, maybe even a little bit challenging.
We hope it's given you some things to think about.
For sure. Just remember, keep seeking truth, keep growing in your faith, and keep diving deep.
We'll see you next time.